topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon. Bill Martinez here. Great to have you with us. And our next guest, Gregory Stenstrom, going to be joining us in just a moment, the author of Parallel Election, A Blueprint for Deception. You know, it's quite ironic that we find ourselves today not wanting to talk about the 2020 election, it would seem, although there's a majority of Americans who believe that something was not right about the 2020 election. And it is our right. It is our constitutional right to seek redress from our government to say, look, you've got to explain this. But our government has not seemed to be interested in doing this. We've had a Jan 6 committee hearing, which, afterwards they destroyed all the evidence or all the information that they had collected, which is quite ironic. Nobody wants to talk about what happened 2020. Nobody wants to talk about what Nancy Pelosi, as the leader of the House, her responsibility to ensure that January 6th did not happen and that we were properly secured. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., we're going to set all that aside, but that all gets complicated into this situation of what happened in November of 2020. Still many questions, no answers, and God forbid that you would bring it up, even though a majority of Americans, as I stated, are still in a quandary. And the only answers that they get is don't talk about it. You know, the talking heads of the mainstream media say it is conclusive. Joe Biden was able to get 82 million votes, and he is the legitimate president of the United States, full stop. Gregory Stenstrom is with us. As I mentioned, he is the author of the book, The Parallel Election, A Blueprint for Deception. Gregory, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Bill.
Well, I cannot thank you and your co-author enough for having the courage to write this book. This comes at a price. I mean, it is amazing, though, a majority of Americans believe that there was something not according to Hoyle when it comes to the 2020 election. But yet, I guess in I don't know, what do you want? A genteel company? We cannot talk about what happened in 2020?
Well, I'm not a genteel guy. So okay. My background, I was a U.S. Naval officer for 22 years, active in reserve. Mm-hmm. And in my civilian career, I spent most of my civilian career in information security, forensics, and fraud investigations. Required quite a bit of money in billions with B as in Bravo, money for municipalities, state and federal government agencies, and commercial companies. So Leah Hoops, who's the co-author of the book, recruited me. She was a Bethel Township committee woman in Delaware County. We happen to live here together. And Delaware County is just southeast of Philadelphia, and it tucked in a corner right. We border the state of Delaware and Maryland. So we're tucked in the corner here. 530,000 people, 405,000 registered voters. So she had recruited me to go into the election in November 3rd, 2020, and everything that happened after that and emanated is detailed in the book, and that's why I'm here today. And I'm grateful for the opportunity because, 2020, I've been an election denier for 3 years. And
yes.
The headlines now with the indictments of President Trump and the indictments in Michigan and Georgia and Arizona, which I hope we have time to talk about today.
Yes.
All of a sudden, a 2020 election is, will be spoken of again. So I think it's germane to what's happening, and it's germane to who will lead our country going into the future. So happy to be here, Bill.
Well, Gregory, can we handle the truth? I mean, because this is what this is all about. This is in search of the truth. And as you and Leah have realized, truth comes at a price. It's not cheap.
Well, you've heard, can we handle the truth? One of my favorite movies,
Yes.
you would guess, is A Few
Yeah.
Good Men,
Right.
and Jack Nicholson when, you can't handle the truth. I really think that the American public and the American people can handle the truth, and it's just a very small minority of our citizenry that doesn't want to hear it and can't hear it. But most people, I think, at this point, after 3 years, right after the election in 2020, the number of people who suspected fraud or were willing even to talk about it was in the double digits,
Mhm.
low double digits, single digits,
Right.
uh, primarily Democrats. But at this point, the latest polls, Rasmussen polls and so forth, the majority of the country is not just thinks there was election fraud, but are convinced of it. And
Mhm.
that's the majority. That includes the majority of Democrats as well. So
Mhm.
you've got the vast majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats. I think at this point, we've had the evidence, the evidentiary base for 3 years of election fraud, which
Mhm.
again, I'm ready to discuss today and how that happens. But we're ready to handle the truth. And
Right.
the courts are finally going to hear us. So
Mhm.
we're here to talk about it today.
Well, this is why it's so important, Gregory, that you come forth and we're able to have this forthright discussion because our viewership is interested in the truth. We keep banging our heads, and what we hear from the left is we have no proof. And go, wait a minute, what do you mean have no proof? There's over 1,000 sworn affidavits of of discrepancies within the election. We saw what happened with these Democratic attorney operatives that stormed these swing state offices, got these states to change the laws while the election was taking place. They changed the rules of the game, so to speak. I mean, this is just egregious. I mean, there's obvious things here, but that side does not want to hear the evidence. So I want to, let you lead and lay out the evidence so that when people say, well, there's no evidence, our audience, our viewers can say, well, wait a minute, that's not necessarily the case. Here's some, here's some key evidentiary points that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, and quite frankly, it's a great place to start in terms of the basics of how our elections work in our country. A lot of people hear about electoral votes. They don't really understand
Mhm.
the mechanics of how the fraud was conducted and how it was hidden.
Mhm.
So the first thing I think people need to know that's critical is, of course, everyone knows there's 50 states, but in those 50 states, there's 3,143 counties. In Louisiana, you have parishes.
Mhm.
In some places, you have wards. Philadelphia has wards, but Philadelphia County. So you have counties, parishes, wards. They're called by different names, but there's 3,143 of them,
Mhm.
and they're counted in the country. I think most people have heard of swing states. They know
Yes.
from election to election, and it varies by election, but generally there's 3 to 8 swing states, usually no more than that in that area, 3 to 8
Mhm.
swing states. So within those swing states, what people are surprised to find out is it takes, depending on the election, whether it's a general election, a presidential election, or another national election in the midterm, only 20 to 32 counties in the United States determine the outcome of the federal elections.
Mhm.
That's it.
Right.
20 counties determine the entire outcome of the 2020 presidential election. So once people understand that, then they'll understand that that they didn't need widespread fraud. So people sitting, I talked this morning in Sioux City, Iowa. I was
Mhm.
talking this morning on a radio show in Panama City, Florida. I've
Yeah.
talked to Juneau, Alaska. So people look and they go, hey, we didn't see any fraud. My neighbors went, we voted, and
Mhm.
the attorney general said there was no evidence of election fraud. So let's
Right.
talk about that for a minute. So I had a statutory duty. I wasn't just a concerned citizen.
Mhm.
Having done quite a few fraud investigations, there's a methodology to it. And what I care about is the input and output into a system, the
Mhm.
ingestion of ballots, the ingestion of mail-in ballots, ingestion of votes, and where they go. So when I look at something, I look at things a lot differently. And one of my frustrations for the last 3 years is when people say, well, there's no evidence of fraud. You wouldn't know you don't know what evidence of fraud looked like if it was staring in you in the face because you're
Right.
not trained in it.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, if I
Yeah.
gave you a dentist drill, would I let you drill my teeth? Would I gave you a scalpel? Would I let you do brain surgery? It's that level. So
Exactly.
people need to understand and respect that there are experts in fraud, and we're out there.
Well, Gregory, it goes back to that example I tell people all the time. Bank tellers, what they study, when it comes to counterfeit money, they don't study the counterfeit; they study the legitimate. That's what they're focused on. So it's easy for them to discern what counterfeit looks like because they have studied the legitimate so closely. And for you, I see the parallel in that you, as an expert in this particular field, and seeing what a legitimate election, what a legitimate electoral process looks like, that when it falls out of those parameters, it comes screaming at you, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And going into the election, and that's a great example for, as a teller. I mean,
Yes.
they would expect them to be able to spot a counterfeit bill like that in the same manner that I was able to look and see the system that was set up and say, well, there's potentials, vectors for fraud here, here, and here, and let's look at them. We
Right.
talk about that in the book, but let's just take a little step back to the 3,143 counties. From 2016 to 2020, multiple legislative acts, multiple things happen in our country that we talk about in the book. And one of the things that happened is that legislation was crafted and introduced in the 37 states and passed in 24 states that changed the fabric of our elections. Now, what protects our vote is decentralization.
Mm-hmm.
Decentralization means I go into my precinct of 100, 200, 300 people. The precinct shouldn't be bigger than 500, ideally.
Right.
But let's just say it's a few hundred people. These are my neighbors, my friends. My next door neighbor happens to be the judge of elections for my particular precinct.
Mm-hmm.
We go in, we know each other. So when people did absentee ballots, we know Joe was on deployment. We know Mary was sick in the hospital. We know, Bob was on vacation and he couldn't make it back. So when we had these mail-in ballots, which were sent to the precincts,
Mm-hmm.
and we opened them, even people of opposing parties, Democrats and Republicans, we might yell at each other over a beer or something, or
Right.
be, and have a contest. But when it came to the elections, they were well adjudicated. The rules were followed, the procedures were followed, the decentralization. These were friends and neighbors working with each other.
Right.
So during that time period up to 2020, what they did is they centralized the vote. And centralizing the vote in particular, centralizing an election, is anathema.
Mm-hmm.
It is the counter for integrity. When you
Right.
centralize an election, you put all of that power into a few hands. And in all the fraud investigations I've ever done, most fraud is conducted by a handful of people. Now, in the book, we use the example of Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12,
Right.
Brad
Mm-hmm.
Pitt, George Clooney. Now,
Right.
look at what they do. They go into a hotel filled with thousands of people, millions of dollars being transacted, huge cast of characters, and the 11 of them pull up, an entertaining heist.
Yes.
It's the same in any fraud. And frauds are usually very simple, too. Elaborate ones are fun to watch, but most of the frauds I've done regarding financial fraud,
Mm-hmm.
they were stuffing their money full with cash.
Yeah.
A lot of them were that simple, keeping a separate set of books, stuff their money with cash. It's always the simple stuff. So I bring that up because now they centralize these votes. I mentioned these key election centers in these key counties. I'm going to mention the counties. In Pennsylvania, you have Philadelphia, Delaware County, Chester County, which borders is the next county over from Delaware,
Mm-hmm.
with 3 counties sitting in the corner of Pennsylvania.
Right.
And then you have Pittsburgh, which is Allegheny County. Those 4 counties basically predominate over the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And those 4 counties can determine the outcome of an election, a national election in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Now let me mention the other ones. In Georgia, which is a swing state,
Mm-hmm.
it was Fulton County and DeKalb County. In Arizona, Maricopa and Pima County. In Michigan, Wayne County and Antrim County. Do these names ring a bell?
Yeah, absolutely.
These are the counties that they centralized the counting in, and they introduced legislation. So also during that time, everyone's heard of Soros money, the cabal and all this.
Right.
Well, there was a concerted effort where Soros and the Clinton Foundation as well, among other I'm going to say left-leaning organizations for polite word. It's the one time I'll be genteel today.
Okay.
But they invested heavily in specific district attorney races. In Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, who's a communist, who's about as far left as they come as a district attorney, they put $1.7 million into his race. Now, in my county, in Delaware County, Jack Stolzheimer had run 4 times for office, hadn't won office, and they gave him $1 million. Boom, in he comes. And it was similar in most of these key pivot counties. Now we throw in the Zuckerberg money.
Now, hang on just a second here, just a minute, Gregory.
Sure.
Now, as this is being set up, I mean, they are setting up a chain of operation here, an infrastructure in order to produce certain results. The Republican Party, where were they? They didn't see this manipulation and this setup taking place?
They saw it. They were complicit in it. We talk about it in the book, and we'll stop there, right there. It's a great point because it's a perfect time to introduce that. In the book, we talk about the GOP and the DNC. The GOP and the DNC are corporate bodies with corporate interests. Now, when they happen to align with Republicans and Democrats who they supposedly represent, all is well.
Yes.
But when they don't represent Republicans. The GOP, the RNC, only represents Republicans when it's aligned with their goals, financial goals, and also private interests. DNC is the same way. A perfect example of that was after the 2016 election, Bernie Sanders, people who were for Bernie Sanders sued the DNC and Wasserman. I'm trying to remember her first name.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz out of Florida.
So they named her person, and they named the DNC. And the case was Wilding versus the DNC. And when you look at the case, and if you take a quick analysis of it, in a nutshell, what the DNC said was, we're a corporate body with a corporate charter, and we can choose and insert any damn candidate we want.
Right.
Period. We don't report to you. We don't have a fiduciary duty to you. Now, ostensibly, they represent Democrats. That's not true.
No,
they don't. As a matter of fact, primaries themselves are constructs of the party. They're not constitutional events. So when you think about it, they're run by the parties to put in and promote the candidates that they want. And if they don't want to endorse a candidate and they don't want a specific candidate that aligns with their party, they don't get in.
Well, and amazing on that is, and this is the thing that has left me in a quandary ever since, was going into California, it was neck and neck between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, right? And then right before the primary, the DNC makes this announcement, Hillary's in, she's got all the votes, and just pulls the carpet underneath Bernie Sanders and his people. Now, Sanders had to go along with it. They promised him whatever they promised him to, fold up his tent. But all his people felt immediately disenfranchised. But I thought it was quite odd and manipulative, to your point, of what the DNC did to a primary candidate.
I think it's a perfect example. Now, I don't want to malign the DNC and the GOP. Certainly people who have been contributing. The GOP has been promoting conservative values in the country. And Democrats, who I think I'm going to say have been subverted by the Communist Party for the most part.
Yeah, you're not the only one that says that. But, the point is, though, Gregory, what you're saying here, is just that you're laying out the field of play here. What are the rules of the game? Yeah. You see, we go in, we think, oh, well, it's RNC. That's our team. DNC, oh, that's their team. And just because they're wearing the same colored jersey doesn't mean that they're necessarily playing for our side. And that's what you're pointing out here.
Absolutely. It's an American people problem. And I look at the word, and one of the things I say the Democrats have been subverted by communists for the most part is what most bridles me is the change in the language. And I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up there. And, I would say a good portion of my family are Democrats and my friends that I grew up with. And that doesn't mean that some of them aren't conservative. But in the ways that they're conservative, I have liberal ideas, and they've changed the language. Communists and leftists and rightists, and name your polarizing entity. they've made liberal a bad name. Since when
Right.
was liberal a bad thing? There's certain things that we should be liberal on. There's certain things we should be conservative on. And whether you align with a political, party or not, that's your business. And the only
Right.
reason we do that is to vote in a primary. The
Exactly.
only reason we have to declare our parties is so that we can vote in a primary. During the primary, the general election,
Yeah.
anyone can vote. It's registered and a qualified elector. So knowing this playing field and knowing that people are being manipulated, there are great GOP people out there and great DNC people out there that love their party and hold certain values high, and I respect that, and I don't want to denigrate that. I just want to point out that that's not everywhere. Remember, all politics is local.
Yes.
And your county GOP and your county DNC may not be watching out for your interests. But I can say one thing for sure. If a candidate is not willing to fight for your vote at the poll, he's not willing or she's not willing to fight for your vote at the ballot box and fight for you in the jury box before and after the election to protect your vote.
Yes.
What the hell are they going to do to protect you in their constituency's interests when they're elected? If they can't protect the ballot box and they don't understand how elections work, they shouldn't be there in the first place. And sad to say, that's the vast number of candidates in our country.
Yeah, sadly. We're talking with Gregory Stenstrom, the author of Parallel Election, a Blueprint for Deception. Greg is a former Naval Academy graduate and officer. And what he's pointing out here, clearly, whether we're talking about the GOP or DNC, and Gregory, I'm not sure I've heard it put out this way, but it makes so much sense because, people may wonder going, what happened to the GOP or the RNC and the lack of support of Donald Trump? I mean, basically, Donald Trump was such a lightning rod to the RNC that there was some incompatibility here. And, they just kind of allowed him to go under the bus, the way I look at it.
Yeah, one of my favorite, I think comedians, if you want to look at the weather vanes for the United States is, in medieval times, they had jesters and they took off
exactly.
the pressure.
Yeah, right.
They took the pressure off of the court and the people, and they could poke fun at the court without, repercussions. And they kind of created a medium with the people. And I think some of our comedians, if you really want to hear the truth, Tucker, I wouldn't call him a comedian, but he presents things in a sardonic, ironic way.
Right.
And he's become a weather vane and highly respected for that. But let's go down to your regular, your Joe Rogan, 30 million listeners, I think, Bill Burr, Dave Chappelle. And I look at these people because they're able to put things in a way that they can talk to their audiences, no matter how polarized they are. And they're able to express the reality of a situation with humor. So I look to them a lot. And I think Dave Chappelle has got one of my favorite pieces where he says, Donald Trump, in a nutshell, is the greatest whistleblower in American history. He came out during the debates as a private multi-billionaire, comes out, and he said, look at all those bad things you heard about that we're doing in private, the rich and wealthy and the power brokers in this country, they're all true.
Right.
And the response from Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, as the Democrats, were like, well, you don't pay your taxes. And he says, well, I don't have to. I take advantage of the same, benefits and tax breaks that you do.
Right.
And he goes, I know you won't change them because your own constituents and the people financing you, they use the same breaks. And quite frankly, that's not fair.
Yeah.
So when he started doing this by becoming a whistleblower, we talked earlier in the show about the uniparty.
Right.
The DNC and the GOP RNC, who finances them? Donors, big business, lobbyist groups with private corporate interests. And Donald Trump comes out and says, hey, blows the whistle. What's he worth? $6 billion. Been the top of mind in the American public for years. The people supporting him are Roger Stone, who is an icon, General Flynn, Paul Manafort. mean, a lot of the rich and famous before he became a Republican president, that was his people.
Mm-hmm.
And the people responded to him. There's a great book, and people should read it. An old book, 1954. There's a guy named Eric Hoffer, Hoffer. And he was actually President Eisenhower's favorite author. He wasn't a particularly educated man, if I remember. I don't even know if he finished college,
Mm-hmm.
but he's a very educated man. And he wrote a book called The True Believer, The Theory of Mass Movements. And one of the theories he had, and at the Academy, we studied all this stuff, and I've studied it since,
Mm-hmm.
is that the theory of mass movements is that a class, and he literally calls it a deplorable class, exists during every mass movement.
Uh-huh.
And what Donald Trump did, and Hillary did it for him, is the night she called him, you represent the deplorables, people were
basket
like,
of deplorables. Yeah, right.
Not only
Exactly.
is this guy the biggest whistleblower,
Right.
but his opponent just galvanized this ready-made, MAGA deplorables and galvanized everybody. That is how mass movements work.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, Trump was a shoo-in for president. And it's one of the reasons he still continues to enjoy support, because even though he's a multi-billionaire, he's still perceived by the people as a man of the people.
Exactly. Well, as you say, he blew the whistle on the southern border. Nobody was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
He blew the whistle on China. He blew the whistle on, our national security or national insecurity. And he blew the whistle on the deep state, which Jerry Nadler and all the Democrats said did not exist, right?
Absolutely. And we did. We're going to skip ahead. I'm just if you make a footnote there, Bill, I want to talk about that group. We've identified that group. And where we were going with this is, and we did a segue into President Trump and that part of the politics. But where we were going at the time was we were going into the election itself. They've got 3,143 counties. They've crafted these centralized counties. And then what they did is they didn't have the funding. There's no budget in the federal budget or county budgets to set up these centralized counting systems. So what they did is they call the Center for Tech and Civic Life, people referred to otherwise as Zuckerberg money. Now,
yes.
$440 million they introduced in the election. That was a big deal. $500 million, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if I told you 90% of that money went to those 20 counties?
Wow.
Aha.
Mm-hmm.
There's something going on here.
Yes.
Okay. We had to finance these centralized counting systems with the mail sorters and the envelope openers and the racks and the ability to process hundreds of thousands, in some cases, millions of votes in one centralized location. We had to finance that. More particularly, somebody had to set that beforehand. It's an area we're looking, and I'm giving a little clue to some of our adversaries and enemies of things that we're looking at. That was set up beforehand.
Yes.
So now I have the stages set. I've got my Ocean's 11 stage. Now I need a centralized area that doesn't have cameras on it, okay, that's isolated, or otherwise in city areas where I can control the ingress and outgress of all votes, ingress and egress of all people, all votes. I can control them.
Right.
We call that the big store in the book, The Parallel Election. And if you look at the buildings that were set up, these centralized buildings, they were isolated buildings. This was crafted. You could have written a script. Who was it that did Ocean's movies? Soderbergh, I think, or Guy Ritchie. A great writer and director could have written this off the back of a napkin,
right?
Setting up this fraud.
Now, where were these big stores located?
They were located in the central areas that I just talked about. Those 20 centralized areas: Fulton County, Georgia; Philadelphia; Delaware County; Chester County; Allegheny County; Maricopa County; Antrim County. This is where they were set up, these centralized counting centers, in buildings, or in Atlanta's case, they had it in, I think, a stadium down there. So in Philadelphia, it was in the convention center. But in all cases, it was very difficult to track the ingress and egress of incoming mail-in ballots, and where the heck how were we populating this election process?
Right.
Now, this was all done by a few people. It was crafted by just a few people. Because when you think about it, we have people ask, are our elections safe? Yes, they should be. We have the Election Assistance Commission, EAC.
Yeah.
They take advantage of experts from the FBI, the NSA, the foremost government experts in security in the world, and they have developed procedures to process electronic votes, to process mail-in ballot votes. It's not that the processes are incorrect if they're followed in accordance with the EAC, and machines are tested beforehand, and the software is verified by hash code. And I'm not going to get too into the specifics. If all of the procedures are followed, we should have pretty safe elections.
Exactly.
But what they do, these small group of subversives in these centralized counting centers, now I've got a select group of people, and I'm talking single digits, no more than low double digit a number of people. I only need 2, 4, 6 people in these centralized counting centers. They can subvert the vote. All they have to do
they have to be in key positions of leadership within these areas, right?
They have to be. What you're going to find is the directors of elections. They're voting machine warehouse supervisors. In Delaware County, we had the guy who was a previous president of the U.S. Steelworkers and an avowed communist, by his own words, hated Trump. And they put him in charge of 8,100 pieces of voting equipment, the election machines, the entire election. They put it in his hands, in his sole custody. So what were they thinking?
Well, you know what they were thinking.
Well,
they were thinking of an expected result. That's what they were thinking.
And later on, after the elections, I get the Alfred E. Newman, or that's the older guys for the Mad Magazine, but the younger folks know Bart Simpson. Like, I didn't do it. Wasn't me. Didn't do it. That's their defense. So I've been doing these fraud investigations for a while, but we've set the stage.
But Greg, before we go any further, we're talking with Gregory Stenstrom, the author of Parallel Election, a blueprint for deception. What you just laid out, was this a consistent model in all these centralized counting centers?
A blueprint for deception.
Yeah.
The subtitle of the book.
Right.
So it's all well set up, and so I walk into the centralized counting center in Delaware County. And they wouldn't let me in for 5 hours. I had to get an attorney.
Oh, wow.
They didn't want me in there. They knew quite frankly, they knew that I had some expertise in fraud. They were waiting for me. They didn't want me in there. So it took me 5 hours just to get in. And what I saw there, and I don't want to get too into the mechanics. It's all in the book, but it was a similar deception everywhere. First night, first day, they processed 120,000 mail-in ballots. 120,000 envelopes get processed. 102,000 for Biden, 18,000 for President Trump. 5 to 1, almost 6 to 1 actually, but that's what they processed. So I'm looking at this and I go, something's wrong here. When you're looking at fraud, you don't want to look at what they'll show you. The first thing any lawyer will tell you, or fraud investigator, is never look at what they're willing to give you. Never look at where they're pointing and saying, hey, look at this. Look at the cameras over here. Look at this evidence I'm willing to give you. What you want to look at is to go, where aren't the cameras?
Right.
So I'm watching these racks of mail-in ballots come in and out of the election center from various places. 3 different elevators, 3 different doors. And I see this back room where it seems there's a lot of activity going on, and the bulk of the mail-in ballots are coming through. And I said, hey, is there a camera back there? No. Well, that's where I want to be.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where I want to be.
Right.
So we asked to go back there, which was our right. We had a statutory role as authorized representatives, certified poll watchers, candidates. And we said, we have a statutory right to go and see this, the canvassing area and the pre-canvassing area. And the solicitors, backed up by police, said no. So I went out, and Leah and I filed our first lawsuit on November 4th of 2022. And basically we said, we want to get back there. Got the injunction from the judge, fought our way back in. When I say fought, we had to go through, the judge again. The solicitors tried to keep us out. They restaged stuff. And finally I had to go in there and literally fight my way through a phalanx of police officers
Wow.
Well, with an injunction in my hand. I mean,
Exactly.
I didn't go in there like some frothing idiot. I walked
No,
in and
right.
said, look, I have a statutory role here. I've got an injunction in my hand, boys. And by now, the police officers knew me. They knew my background. They knew I was ex-military. Most of them are ex-military. There's a certain level of respect there. I'm not walking in with as some frothing,
Right.
lunatic.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
They knew who I was, and they said, hey, boys, I got an order from the judge. So if and I put this in the book, if you really want to go asses and elbows here and get in a fight on national TV, on camera, I'm willing to do it. Don't want to, but I'm willing to.
Right.
So what's it going to be? They let us back there. Let me back there and a Democrat representative. So what we find is 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots. 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots. So let me explain that. 120,000 have already been counted. There's 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots back there, right?
Mm-hmm.
They only mailed 104,000. Okay. So let's talk about the math here.
Yes, right.
Yeah. 120 plus 70 would be more than 104. Now they adjusted that number later, and I think they bumped it all the way up to, first they bumped it to 120, then 136. They kept changing the website. Well, we mailed out 156,000. So whatever. So we go to court, and so November 4th, I just want to stay on November 4th. So I said, boys, there's a big problem. We have a big problem here. So no sooner do I, earlier in the day, and no sooner do we find this out, but the voting machine warehouse supervisor I mentioned to you earlier.
Right.
Well, the night of the election, they were missing 64 of these portable USB drives, they call them. Mm-hmm. There's different election machines in the country. There's ES&S, Dominion, Smart, Hart InterCivic.
Right.
And there's other manufacturers too. All of them who are approved and certified by the EAC. The counties buy the machines they want, which is their right and privilege. As long as the procedures are followed, it's all good.
Right.
At the end of the election night on November 3rd, they're missing 64 of these portable drives. Now these are the results that come out of the election machines. They're missing them. 2 days later, this guy wanders in, and people, and he starts putting them in this baggie of USB devices in the tabulation servers. I go, whoa. I get the election supervisor, the clerk of elections, the deputy sheriff. And I said, what is this guy doing?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously? He's not part of the process. He's not supposed to be in here. He doesn't have the authority. He didn't even have the password to log in. Another guy had to log him in. And he's sticking USB drives in that have tens of thousands of votes on them.
Oh, my gosh.
So I said, stop. Oh, no, Mr. Stenstrom, you can't interfere. Like, what do you mean? I'm not interfering. I'm allowed to intervene. I'm not allowed to interfere. I can't tackle the guy.
Right.
But I'm allowed to intervene and question and stop and get an adjudication. Nope. 2 hours after, he left, he skulked in and he skulked out. We have multiple affidavits to this. And at this point I was excited. I was yelling, and I said, I want to see on the screen what the election results were. What is the outcome of those drives being put in? Now they were updating the election pretty much every 20 minutes, half an hour, as different things were happening. 2 hours, I'm fighting with them. They didn't want to show it. Finally, they put it up. 50,000 votes. Flip. So I go, holy cow, this is a complete mess. So I told you I was involved in different fraud investigations on behalf of the government. So William McSwain, was the U.S. attorney for Eastern Pennsylvania. I have his number in my cell phone. We're not friends, I would say, but acquaintances. We have some of the same circles. He knows who I am. Of course, I know who he is, but he knew who I was. He knew I was a investigator, ex-Navy guy, and he's a former Marine, or he's a Marine.
Yes.
Never former. He's a Marine.
Yes, exactly. Always. Yeah.
And he picks up my call. Now this is at night, Saturday night on the 7th. And I said, hey, Bill, I said, you know me. I said, I'm sending you a disclosure. I got 26-page disclosure here with a description of everything that happened here. Everything I just described to you. And I have a forensic team. I know you have one. I said, if we take forensic images of a couple of these tabulation servers, maybe the election management system, a couple of voting machines, a scanner, I think 4, 5, 6 machines here. If we get a forensic image of these machines, we're going to see the fraud.
Yeah.
Because you're going to see in the logs the insertion of USB V drives. You're going to see votes not tallied right. And I said, we need to grab some of the physical evidence too. Now, those 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots in the back room, those are the real votes. Those are the votes that you send in. So let's back up to the RNC saying, hey, we're going to cheat betterer. We're going to harvest the vote. I don't care if they harvest 1 billion votes.
Yes.
And 1 billion mail-in ballots. They won't count them. They don't control the centralized counting centers.
Exactly.
They won't get counted. They'll go in another back room, or they'll go in another truck, and they're going to count whatever mail-in ballots they put together to run them through the machines. They won't be counted. And one of the ways I know that is immediately after the election, they destroyed all of the forensic evidence, destroyed the images of the envelopes, destroyed the physical envelopes, wiped out all the evidence they could.
Is this in all the counties that were suspects?
They did it in particular in Delaware County, but as a forensic computer scientist and an expert in fraud, people were calling me. We knew they were destroying this stuff, and they said, "Greg, we got to stop this." And I said, "Look, stop. The destruction of evidence. It's called spoliation. Spoliation. Some people, it's actually spelled spoliation. 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 Spoliation of evidence is evidence. It's an inference of guilt.
Yes, exactly.
Now, people that when they keep telling people, "Oh, you have no evidence," I don't need evidence. The burden of proof and the burden of production is on the counties.
Exactly.
You have to prove you ran a fair and honest election, in a transparent election. I don't have to prove and bring evidence, which I can't produce, which you, for the most part, have. Okay, it's not. I don't have the burden of proof there. You have the burden of proof. Now, we still had tremendous amounts of evidence, as you mentioned earlier, right at the start of the show, thousands of affidavits, HAVA violations, photographs, videos. And so November 7th, we'll come back to Bill McSwain, calls me up a half an hour later and says, "Hey, Greg, no, can't do it." Now,
Wow.
There's two people who can order Bill McSwain to stand down. President Trump, he didn't do it.
Right.
And U.S. Attorney General Barr at the time. So we've since got FOIA requests, 3 years worth of FOIA requests that we collected in our own evidence. And what it shows is that declaration I sent to Bill McSwain went through the entire top echelon of the DOJ, the Inspector General, the FBI, the National Security Council, CIA, multiple congressmen and senators, the head of the oversight, head of the judiciary. It went to everybody. Every U.S. attorney in the country, 94 of them, 74 IGs. It went through the entire top echelon of the government. Richard Pilger, who has been a special counsel and who at the time was in charge of the criminal referral, he was the criminal referral manager for elections. He resigned over this. Over the next 2 days, though, they're pooping their pants.
Yeah.
They're not just getting evidence from me, but they're getting calls from Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Nevada. They're getting calls coming in from these targeted key pivot counties.
Exactly.
Now,
and wait, Greg, let me ask you this. So Bill Barr sees this document that you sent, which is clear evidence. I'm sorry.
He saw it. Positive proof. Everybody there, senior counsel, chief counsel, deputy counsel, everybody saw it. Their finger marks are all over it.
So he says now, even in recent times, that there's no evidence.
No, somebody said. If you look at the emails, which we submitted in the evidentiary record. Now, here's the thing is the evidentiary record, the evidentiary base is sitting in the file cabinets of the DOJ. We submitted all this to them. They have it. We submitted it in the Court of Philadelphia. We submitted it in Delaware County Court. We submitted it with the Commonwealth Court. We submitted it with the U.S. Supreme Court. This evidentiary base is overwhelming. they've already admitted in the, I mentioned about the mail-in ballots, the unopened
Right.
ones, and they've already admitted that happened.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't even denied it anymore. It's undisputed that tens of thousands of unopened mail-in ballots were sitting in Delaware County. Undisputed, irrefutable. This is all in the evidentiary base.
But help me understand here, Gregory. How does Bill Barr make the statement that he makes?
He didn't. Over the next 2 days, we have all the FOIAs and all the emails. They craft an email. They craft a public release, and it says there was, quote, no widespread evidence of election fraud. Now, what was reported by the press, what you just said? There was no evidence. There was no evidence of fraud. No, that's not what Bill Barr said. He said there was no widespread evidence, knowing full well it only takes 20 to 30 counties
exactly
in the entire election. Now,
so that's his plausible deniability. That's his cover.
Pilger resigns, and this is all done on November 9th. Now, because I'm an investigator and I've done this before, what other people didn't do or didn't know to do is I'm submitting what they call disclosures, allegations, documents in the public record. Sending letters and emails and certified letters to the district attorney, the Pennsylvania attorney general, the U.S. attorney general. They're getting certified letters with these disclosures in them. So what Bill Barr did, Attorney General Rosen, Special Counsel Jack Smith, who just indicted Trump, Inspector General Horowitz, Director of the FBI Christopher Wray did. You know what they did? It's in the public record. They obstructed the federal investigations. They obstructed the investigation.
Yeah.
So now we come back to this last month. So it takes us 3 years to find this out. And by the way,
Greg, let me tell you where we are right now. We got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to let you kind of put a bow on this as best you can, because there's so much to this. And you've been very gracious in offering a copy of your book, Parallel Election, A Blueprint for Deception. The book is available at all the usual places, but also a download access. So I'll let you present all that in these last 3 minutes that we have together. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, let's put a bow on it. And the bow is this. All of the ailments of our country get tied to, everyone thinks it's the cabal, the deep state, and so forth. So what this is this is a program for state capture and progressive social reconstruction. This is their goal.
Yeah.
And this is being crafted by a very small group of people called the council. And the council...
Who's the head of the council?
It's actually the person among equals is Inspector General Horowitz.
Okay.
And they think Horowitz, and they call it the SIGI.
Yes.
And the SIGI, or the council, which was formed in 1978 and further crafted in 1988 and 2008 under different presidents, where they cemented this power, is basically a triumvirate of the DOJ, top levels of the DOJ, top level of the Inspector General, the Public Integrity Sector, the PIN, the Office of Professional Responsibility, which handles whistleblowers and other things, and then the FBI and special counsels. And if you look at this over the last 50, 60 years, these people all rotate from position to position to position.
Right.
Special counsel to deputy director of the FBI, deputy attorney general, SIGI, head of they all rotate. They're all the same people. And if you look at all the ailments, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, they didn't investigate J6.
Right.
Same people.
Right.
They didn't investigate vaccines. Same people. They didn't investigate the elections. Same people. They indicted Trump. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this put a bow in it. I filed criminal allegations with the House Judiciary and Jim Jordan, who's the head of the House Judiciary. We've notified the House Oversight and Senate Oversight. We know they have these disclosures, and we filed criminal charges against these people. I did, and multiple whistleblowers. So I'm a federal whistleblower. And it's a big part, I think, of why you're seeing the indictments now and all the craziness in Michigan and Arizona and all this attention all of a sudden to the 2020 election, which they said, let's move on from.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, now that the evidentiary base and all these things are coming to trial and their criminality is going to be exposed, what do? A shaping exercise to make it look, well, President Trump, it wasn't us. We're the Bart Simpson. We didn't do it. It was President Trump. So that's where we are. And what I'd like to do is I really appreciate people listening to this. We wrote a book, Leah Hoops and myself, detailing all this, including 126 pages of hard physical evidence, videos, audios of election officials admitting they fabricated the vote. It's all in the book, all on the website, parallelelection.com. We also started a social media platform. I co-founded a social media platform called www.patriot.online. No .com, no .net, it's patriot.online. You'll find all of our cases there, all the election resources. We're posting a copy of our book, the PDF version, for people who don't have the money. It's cheap. It's available on Amazon and Parallel Election.
Right.
But a lot of people, $17, I think, to $25, depending on the outlet. So we're going to make it available to people to download. I sent you the link, Bill.
Yes, exactly.
And we want people to download this and understand what's going on, because they're going to need to understand what's going on in elections. And I want to give a shout out to President Trump, who is the greatest whistleblower of all time. I'm a Republican. I've never met President Trump, never spoken to him. But I want to say that this group of individuals that have taken over our country, they have a strategy called isolate, contain, and destroy. And they go after President Trump, any of his allies, and with the most outrageous of allegations and false charges. And they get away with it. And they've been getting away with it. But we have a strategy called connect, engage, and restore. And we're working. And this is what we're doing. And the people here, please take a look at the book. Educate yourselves. Get to the polls. Be supportive. And start talking with each other in a civil way.
Yes.
If we do that, we're on our way home.
Exactly. That we've got to be the United States of America. We've got to come together and understand the founding principles, these first principles that started this great American idea. We have to re-embrace those first principles to get this country back on track. Gregory Stenstrom, thank you so much for the great work that you and Leah have done on behalf of patriots all over this country, and patriots of all colors and political rank and position, Republican, Democrat, independents, because if we're going to survive and maintain this democratic republic, it's going to require all hands on deck and people of passion to fight back against these bullies that have taken over our government. Gregory, again, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
You got it. Gregory Stenstrom has been our guest, and we're so grateful to have him here with us today. For more information and to be a part of this mighty Martinez movement to return to God and to save our country, go to BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you, and may his face shine upon you, and may he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thanks for being with us. Take care.